The Mishneh Torah, written by Maimonides, is a collection of laws that help the everyday Jew understand what it is that they need to do in life. And in the section on Pesach, in chapter 2, it's really quite a fascinating section, because the Torah tells us that there must be no leaven found in our homes during Pesach, and so we have a search before Pesach, the night before, usually with candle and with a feather. That's the tradition. And Maimonides in chapter 2 of leavened and unleavened bread in Mishneh Torah talks about what light is acceptable and what light is not acceptable. But then he adds really interesting thing, talking about should we search the hole in between and a wall between one person's house and another. And so he writes, a hole in the middle of a wall of the house between a person and their colleague should be searched by both individuals, each searching to the extent that their hand reaches. In other words, you've got two houses adjoined and you've got a hole in the wall that connects the two. And if both people are Jewish, they both need to search the hole to make sure that there's no chametz, that there's no leavened products in the hole. And you can't just leave it for one person to say, I searched, and so it's all good. They both have to search. Afterwards, if the person who searches doesn't find any, then they nullify it in their heart, saying essentially, if the other person finds some, that's not on me anymore. I've done the best that I can. But the interesting thing is, this is a wall. This is where the wall separates two Jewish homes. What happens if it's a home of a Jew and a non-Jew? And then a Jew puts their hand in the hole and is rummaging around like this. What does the non-Jew, looking at their wall, seeing this Jewish hand going through the hole and sort of looking around for chametz, what do they assume? Maimonides says that they assume that the Jew is casting a spell against them. And so therefore, Maimonides says that the Jew shouldn't search that hole, shouldn't put their hand in that hole between their home and the non-Jewish neighbor's home, because we don't want non-Jews to believe that we're casting spells. This is really quite extraordinary in terms of historical context, what it shares in terms of Jews and non-Jews living absolutely in immediate proximity to each other. But it also shares a concern about anti-Semitism, but it also adds something really quite extraordinary, which is the search for chametz is not as important as making sure that non-Jews don't feel that we're casting spells against them. So it provides a priority list for Maimonides and for us, which I think is really informative. And so Maimonides says, in that instance, all the Jewish person needs to do is nullify the chametz in the hole, to say in their heart, there is no chametz there, or if there is, it is not to be treated as chametz for me. But then that chapter carries on in an even more fascinating way, picking up from a concern in Talmud, which is quite simply, what if you have searched your house, you have got rid of all the chametz, all the leavened products before Pesach, and then you see a mouse eating chametz in your home? What do you do? This is a real concern of Talmud and of later authorities. First, he talks about a weasel. What happens if you see a weasel with chametz? And then he talks about a mouse. A person who saw a mouse enter their home with chametz in its mouth after they searched, Maimonides says that person must search a second time. This applies even if they found crumbs in the middle of the house, which is where mice don't tend to be, because mice have very poor eyesight, so they tend to run alongside walls because they can't see, so they use the walls as guides. If you're laying down mouse traps, that's one of the reasons why you lie them at the wall and not in the middle of the home. The other reason is you don't want to step on them. But Talmud and Maimonides knows this. He knows that mice tend to be next to walls. So even if you find crumbs in the middle of the house, we don't necessarily presume that the mouse already ate the bread in this place and that these are the crumbs, because we have to assume the mouse ate the bread or the chametz where the mouse normally exists, along the walls. So rather, Maimonides says we suspect it left the bread in a hole or in a window, and that the crumbs are originally located there, so you must search again. And if you don't find anything, Maimonides says, you must search for the entire house. But if you find the exact piece of bread that you saw the mouse had, then you don't need to search any further. Because the assumption is that that's all there is, and that the mouse wouldn't have left crumbs elsewhere. All of this may sound a little bit silly, but I think it's actually really important. And the reason I think it's important is because it asks us to what level do we need to be machmir, do we need to be strict when we're searching for chametz, when we're searching for leavened products before Pesach, which starts very soon. How strict do we need to be? The Torah is very clear that we shouldn't find any chametz in our homes. And there are people who will lock away chametz and seal a cabinet and say, see, I will not see chametz, I will not find chametz in my home during this time. Others will go even further and actually sell that chametz to a non-Jewish friend or non-Jewish neighbor and seal it off and say to that person, this is yours, it's going to be inaccessible for this week. And I won't be able to see it, and it will be sealed away. And then at the end of the week after Pesach, they come back and say, I'd like to buy this back from you. And I actually, when I was a student rabbi, we had a house and we had some non-Jewish friends who were studying with us at the Liobet College, not for the rabbinic program, obviously, for the BA program. And we actually brought them in. We thought it might be a nice thing to do, to sell our chametz to them, to bring them into this ritual. And they felt very included, even if I felt a little bit awkward at the time, because it's using a rather clear loophole that says you shouldn't find chametz in your home, and you shouldn't own chametz. So we have the chametz in our home, we just don't open it, there's no chance of finding it, and we don't own it for that period. But that's quite strict in terms of observance for Pesach. And I think there is value in some sort of strictness here. There is value in trying to work out what is chametz and how do we remove it from our homes. But this leads to the question of kitniot, of legumes, because especially in the Middle Ages, this idea of kitniot, of legumes being chametz, increased. Even though Talmud is very clear that you put down certain things on the table, the Seder table, so that kids stay awake, you give them certain foods. And some of them are what are considered as kitniot, as legumes, which later authorities said aren't acceptable. Maimonides, interestingly, is quite liberal on this. And it's rather interesting to see where do we go in terms of stringency on Pesach. I do remember one of my teachers, Rabbi Eli Tikva, talking about the challenge of Pesach in that we're so strict in what it is that we eat, we end up being imprisoned ourselves. We end up in a festival celebrating liberation, we end up being less liberated in our food choices. And I think there's something to be said for that, in the sense that Pesach, as we saw in one of our previous Introduction to Reform Judaism sessions, Pesach isn't about freedom to do what we want. It's about freedom to serve God. It's about freedom from oppression and then freedom to choose to be in relationship with God. And so for me, it's a very interesting festival because we need to determine what does it mean to be machmir, to be strict when it comes to chametz, when it comes to these leavened products. And for me, I think there is absolute value in clearing our homes, but I think there's something else. I think the strictness of Pesach also needs to be the chametz in our hearts. And that may sound a little woolly Santa Fe, I get that. But the fact that we can nullify chametz in our home by nullifying it in our heart suggests that there is a connection between the emotional and the physical, or the internal and the external. By which I mean there may be physical chametz in the home, in the mouse hole, in the hole that leads from one home to another, but we can nullify it by turning around and saying it no longer exists for me. And if we can change the state of something just by believing it, then maybe there's something to be said for changing who we are by believing it. And what is chametz? Chametz is that which is leavened, which is puffed up. It's the ego, it's the pride. And I think there's something very powerful for me about Pesach and removing the chametz, not just from our homes, but from our hearts as well. Because we're halfway through the year, and it's not enough to just turn around during the month of Elul before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and say, now let me get rid of the negative aspects of myself. We actually have a half-year reminder, which is Pesach, which says, clear your home of chametz, but I would also add, as many others do, clear your heart of chametz as well. Where is it that we react totally out of ego and pride and selfishness? Where is it that we don't look to others or care for others? And that seems particularly appropriate on Pesach, because it's not just a festival of our liberation, but everyone's liberation. Of course, the story is the story of the Hebrews and their liberation. But we need to feel that we are being liberated at every year at the Seder. We retell the story to say we are leaving Egypt. And we are leaving Egypt, that narrow place, to a more expansive place. A more expansive place emotionally, spiritually. And so part of that leaving the narrow place is us making sure that we can help to liberate others as well. And we can only do that if we take the chametz, those elevated parts of ourselves, out as well. So I share this in advance, even though it's not Pesach this week, but it is going to be the following weekend, so that you can perhaps think about not just how to prepare for the physical search for chametz, but also the emotional, spiritual search for chametz. What is it within me before Pesach that I need to remove so that there is no chametz in my home and in my heart? I hope that you'll join us tomorrow for Torah study, where we're going to be looking through more of this really exciting chapter by Maimonides, including, we've covered a weasel just briefly, we've covered a mouse briefly. What happens if you find an infant in your home carrying bread after the search? Do we assume that they've left crumbs elsewhere or not? That's actually a very interesting extra part. And what is chametz? What does it? How do we understand it? What are we allowed to eat at the Seder? Who must eat and drink? What does it mean to have the cups of wine? Maimonides talks about watering it down. It's very interesting. Who should recline and who should not recline? Maimonides, I think it's fair to say, becomes very medieval at this point. Later commentators disagree with Maimonides. And the idea of this Torah study session tomorrow, which looks at this excerpt of the Mishneh Torah by Maimonides, is to help us prepare ritually for Pesach, as well as helping us to prepare emotionally and spiritually. So I do hope that you'll join us for that and for our service tomorrow morning as well, which is live and also on Zoom. And tonight we also have our family service, which is led by Brian, our Director of Education. He brings the guitar. It's going to be special dinosaur themed, and every young person who's present apparently is getting a special prize. So please bring the family and also support the young families. It's really important, and I will share from a personal perspective. I was made to come to services as a child every single week, every Friday and every Saturday. It's a thing that our family did. And one of the things that was most important to me as a young person was seeing all the old people, as they were, seeing all the old people there regularly. And it so impressed me as a child, their dedication to Judaism, their commitment to the services, their voices. I still remember how some of them sang. And you can be that for the children in our community during the family service. So please don't think that the family service is just for young families and their children. It's not. It's for you too. Yes, I understand that the tone is a little bit lighter. The service is a little bit shorter. But there's still a lot of spiritual value in this family service. And there's value that you may not even realize, not just for you, but for the children who come in seeing you and knowing you and coming to really respect and honor you for what you bring to the service, so that they know this isn't just pediatric Judaism. This isn't just Judaism for children, it's for people of all ages. So I encourage you to join us for our Kabbalat Shabbat service this evening, the family service, which is earlier. That's going to be in person. If you can't make it in person, then please, of course, join us through our Temple Beth Shalom website, where you can stream the service as well. I wish you a Shabbat of calm, of peace, and of starting to remove Chametz from the heart, so that next week we can also remove Chametz from our homes. I hope to see you soon and wish you Shabbat Shalom.